appointments include serving as the scientific director for the Urban Indian Health Institute, an Indian Health Service designated tribal epidemiology center for nearly 10 years. A primary research focus for Dr. Tawali is the utility and validity of health information for racial minorities, specifically diabetes and epigenetics related to health disparities. Her current research is related to perceptions of biobanking for research among Kanaka Maoli. Maile is an executive board member of the American Public Health Association, a founding member of the Indigenous Genomics Alliance, the only international organization focused on genomic research affecting indigenous people, and she's also the secretary of the Ko'olauloa Community Health and Wellness Center. Right now she's an assistant professor of indigenous health and the chair of health and policy management at UH Manoa, where she brings cultural, ethical, and community-oriented perspectives to the instruction of public health. So that's Maile, all that she does. So a round of applause for her, that'd be really great. Thank you. So I was fortunate enough to sit in on one of Maile's classes and take one of her classes last semester, and just listening to her research and the things that she focuses on, she brings in a lot of connections between culture and ethics and research in terms of the genetic requirements. And something that came up that caught our attention recently that she's been doing on sort of researching and facilitating currently is the issue of biobanking. And so a biobank is just an early definition for the discussion here is a collection of biological samples such as blood or tissues and health information that's used for research. And so coming from a history and a perspective of an indigenous people, this can be very scary for us, and also with a history of harm that can be caused by being the recipients of sort of research that doesn't always have our best interest in mind. So it's something that could be very scary and harmful to us. However, it can also be very beneficial if the research is coordinated by us and if it's in our own control and sort of the process is self-determined by us, so that it's our own research for us, done by us for a certain purpose that will in the end benefit our communities. So that's where Maile will sort of give us some pointers and as well as a lot of information so that we can be educated about this topic. So when communities such as research or prospectors come to us asking for our samples, then we'll be the ones asking them questions about their intentions, about where they're taking this research, and just sort of giving us a lot of information that will keep us ready so that we can organize our own facilities and take them back from the people who are benefiting from our samples. And also in terms of us culturally and as a people, as Kanaka Maoli, our own, the mana that's imbued within these blood samples and parts of us, they're very precious to us, and it's very important from a sovereignty perspective that we are the ones determining what happens to these samples and how they're used. So relating that to the MANA platform, then our 10, maybe 12, 13-point platform right now, we're going to be hitting upon like the movement building side, including independence and health, as well as popular education, because biobanking has been going on, it's already happening, and it's not common knowledge to me, and I'm sure like there's not a lot of us who understand that this is already occurring, and that so we do need to be aware of that it's occurring, and that we need to take control over and self-determine for ourselves what this research means for us. So that I'm just going to give it over to Maile now, and she'll help to get us ready.
Aloha, everyone. Thank you for coming. I have like really bad ADD, so I'm like paying attention to like what's going on over there. So I don't know if anybody's else having trouble, but please come in and sit down with us. I kind of feel like I want to go over there because this is just more like a conversation. So just please come in, and I find that this is kind of a small group, so it doesn't have to be very formal. But I wanted to basically have a conversation with folks and talk to people, and mainly sort of be able to just respond to questions that folks might be having around issues around biobanking, or just things that you may want to ask somebody who is in the field. So I'll just tell you a little bit about what I'm doing. About 15 years ago, I was young and impressionable and excited about being a crazy radical sovereignty activist, and needed to go to school. And so I sat down with Kikuni Blaisdell and Marjorie Mao, Emma Luli, a lot of the health professionals in our community, and asked, what do you folks want me to do? How can I be of use to our community? And how each one of them individually responded was, one person said they needed an epidemiologist, a person to track health disease in the Native Hawaiian population. Someone said that they needed me to become a geneticist so I could help us establish the Hawaiian Sperm Bank. So everybody had their own idea of how I could be of use. And I went back to school in University of Washington, and I got every degree associated with what they asked me to do. And about 2 years ago, I came home and said, okay, I'm ready. How can I be of use? How can I help? So I started working at Papaololokahi, and I built the Native Hawaiian Epidemiology Center. I'm now responding to requests for the federal government, advocating for Native Hawaiian health. I teach at the university genetic health. I teach medical ethics. And right now I'm starting to find that there's a lot going on that we as Hawaiian people don't know about. And I'm trying to put together a paper that will help to respond to researchers who are coming to our community to let them know that the Hawaiian community is concerned and that we know about the fact that biobanking is happening, it's moving forward, and we would like to guide the process instead of being subject to the research process. So I've been having a number of forums, focus groups, discussions in the community, and had an opportunity to talk with Lealoha and other people, and they asked me to come and talk at this forum because I think this is something that folks are aware is sort of a new form of colonialism on us today, which is the repositories of Native Hawaiian DNA. And so it's a conversation that should be had in this type of forum. And I just wanted to make myself available to maybe respond to questions, maybe help to mitigate any kind of concerns people have. Almost every single time I have a conversation like this, people want to know what's going around on cloning. I can dispel any myths, and I can also support any of the things that are happening. It's John. Yay. Anyhow, so I have a handout, and we have copies up here. And there's some basic questions that everybody should know about. And these are the things that I've... It's hard to talk when you're listening to something else, so? So there's a number of things that I think people should just basically know about. And the first thing is what is a biobank? So it's the storage of human body materials such as tissue, blood, bone, urine, or saliva for the purposes of medical research. And medical research is the only reason why people would be biobanking any tissue. There are things like blood banks, there's other types of banks that are available out there for people, but most of those are for medical need, like a blood bank where you donate blood for someone else. That's in a case of an emergency, someone needs medical help, they can use that blood. This is not that type of bank. A biobank is a place where you would, if you were to go under surgery and have a tumor removed, they would take that tumor and they would store what is left over in a tissue bank that would be researched for the purposes of understanding disease. So there is benefits to medical research. Every single one of us is subject to the benefits of medical research. Smallpox, all the things that wiped out the Hawaiian community in the past have now been treated, and we are now healthy today because we are able to eliminate some of the disease that's in our community. But also just basic disease that folks face, diabetes, hypertension, all the things that were affected in our community. Medical research is helping to improve that. John was in my focus group like a week ago, so it's sort of like, he gave me like the go for it girl. So I'm just kind of thinking back to some of the things that he brought up as well. Other questions that I think you folks should be aware of that I put on this piece of paper is that in addition to medical research benefiting the population, there are also risks to our population. And there's a couple cases of exploitation and things that have happened to indigenous people throughout the world. And I do have to, people should be aware that we as indigenous people, we are basically gold mines for researchers. Our DNA holds a lot of the keys to understanding disease on the planet. And that's why indigenous people are often sought after. Our plants are sought after, our bodies are sought after. And it's because indigenous people do have a very different type of genetic material that helps to answer questions that other DNA may not have that ability. So researchers are very curious, and they'll say things like that. They are not only curious about our DNA and diseases that our people face, but they are also fascinated by our origins and other things that really don't pertain to our health and wellness. And so we have to kind of be aware of the research that comes in, needs to be helpful, especially when we as an indigenous people are facing some of the gravest health disparities on the planet. So as we look at how research is affecting our community, we want to know that the research that's being done is benefiting our people. There are other risks, like a loss of confidentiality. When your information goes into a biobank, not only does your tissue go into it, but also your information about your health, your how your body reacts to certain medications, your race, other things are associated with that tissue as well. Did you have a question?
Is everybody accepting this? How do you address questions that
Right. So, right. So here, let me get. I'm getting down to that. So once you just, so you have the form. So the next question that I have on there that you folks should be asking or might want to have information on is once your tissue is put into a biobank. And I have to tell you, it is standard practice. There are biobanks that are at Queen's Medical Hospital. Kapi'olani has a cord blood bank where I think they have 26,000 Native Hawaiian baby cord blood samples on storage. Kaiser Permanente, where a lot of us, I think is the #1 health provider for Native Hawaiians in the state of Hawaii, has a biobank. There's only, I think, 39 Native Hawaiians that have tissue in that bank. But these are happening already. And they are a standard practice of medical care. The study that I'm doing right now is funded by the National Cancer Institute. I don't know if folks are aware, there's a program called Imihale, which is a cancer navigation program. It's associated with Queens right now. Hi, Papa. And at Queens, when the Imihale had their cancer navigation grant to help people get through the cancer treatment process, a requirement of that grant was that they were to have a grant, a research study to look at how to get Native Hawaiians to put their tissue in a biobank. And I'm being one of the only Hawaiians who have a background in genetics, was asked to conduct this study. But I refused to develop materials to encourage Hawaiians to participate in biobanks. I instead made a compromise that I would at least have conversations to gather information from the Native Hawaiian community on what are your concerns about biobanking. And instead of putting together a how do I coerce you into putting your tissue in a biobank, it was more of a, I want to convince researchers that when they approach our communities, that they need to be prepared, that we have thought about these issues, that we are aware of the risks, and we want to govern the process. So part of what I'm trying to do in this is to put out that document that will help that. Good? Okay. So that's the research project that I'm doing. And so biobanks are happening. We need to figure out and put out that information on how we want that process to happen. So are there any benefits to me? Because this is research, the way that research is defined is there is no direct benefit to you at all. There is, if you put your tissue in a biobank, it is with the understanding that that your tissue, that if you, that it's not going to affect your health. So if you have a special disease that requires medical attention, that will be addressed through your diagnostic test. Leftover tissue will be put in the biobank. They will use that tissue to answer research questions. Say they make a lot of money because they've discovered a drug or a treatment associated with using your tissue, that money is not going to come back to you. Or any benefit to that treatment will not necessarily come back to you. The goal is for research is that the world as a whole does get better because we are improving research, improving medical treatment, because people are participating in research that improves health and wellness for the world as we know it. So there's benefit, but it may not help you as an individual getting care. So then my last thing that I have on here is, what should we be asking researchers? And this is a kind of, at the end of some of the research that I've been doing, this is sort of where it's led up to, is that I've talked to folks, and a lot of our community says, well, I didn't know that. I didn't know that when I was asked to put my baby's blood in the cord blood bank, that this is what I was going to be participating in. And so here, some of the questions that I think we as a Hawaiian community should be asking researchers when they come to us. We should be asking, who is actually conducting this research? What kinds of studies will my tissue be used for? Like, for example, the Havasupai, which is a tribe that's at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, they're part of the Navajo Nation, were asked to participate in a diabetes study. About 70% of the population have diabetes, and so they were approached by the University of Arizona, University of Arizona asked if they wanted to participate in the diabetes studies. The Havasupai agreed to participate in a diabetes study. A couple years later, a Havasupai woman was going to school at the University of Arizona and wanted to find out what kind of research had been published on diabetes associated with their tribal data, their DNA and their blood that was given to the research institution. And they found absolutely no studies published on diabetes, but they found studies published on schizophrenia, incest, and the true origins of the Havasupai people, none of which they agreed to participate in. There was no research publications on diabetes. And so this is the process of what are you agreeing to participate in. When you sign an informed consent form for one study, you are agreeing to participate in that study. But with a biobank, it's different. You are agreeing to no longer have control over your DNA when it sits in a bank. So you don't get to decide how your tissue is used or what study you want your baby's cord blood used for. And that's something that you need to really be aware of if you're being approached, so that you may be okay with that, but you need to be aware of that and in control of that process. Yes? The biorepositories, most of the time they're like a cancer tumor registry, which is everyone who has cancer, who has a tumor removed, they'll put all of the tissue that they gather, regardless of race, into the biobank. There are unique things about Native Hawaiian DNA, and we don't exactly understand that. We know that for Native Hawaiian populations, there are some types of tumors that are more fast progressing cancer than other types. We don't even really understand why. So why Native Hawaiians? Because Native Hawaiian women have a higher mortality rate for breast cancer and cervical cancer, but we don't really understand why it's progressing so quickly among Native Hawaiians. We do have a Native Hawaiian oncologist, and he tried to access that tissue to do research on Native Hawaiians and was actually denied access to the tissue. So you have the biorepositories. The DNA in the Native Hawaiian community is available, but may not be available for certain studies. So why Native Hawaiians? Because we face disease in a unique way that may need to be may hold the keys to answering broader questions. Correct. We are all Right, and this is the reason why I think that we as a Hawaiian community need to start thinking about an alternative to a biorepository in an institution where we have no governance or control. So one of the things that's coming up are the conversations around the creation of a Native Hawaiian DNA repository or tissue repository. And this idea of what if Hawaiians were putting their tissue in a Hawaiian controlled biorepository, where the Hawaiian community, whatever you wanted to set up, actually had full authority and control over what types of research, how it benefited the Hawaiian community, who was actually doing the research, and how Hawaiians were contacted in response to whether or not they wanted their tissue used in a certain study. Right now, the research process is not in our hands, but there are models for self-governance. The Indian tribes are starting to set up their own biorepositories, and this is a conversation that the Native Hawaiian community needs to have, of the fact that we are facing serious health disparities, and we have 250 some Native Hawaiian physicians today. We may want to engage with a research community that is focusing on Native Hawaiian health, and we may want to encourage them to do research with biobanks that are collected for the purposes of Native Hawaiian health. But right now there currently doesn't exist that mechanism, and you know, I don't know who would govern it. I don't know, you know, I mean, you know, with tribes it's a lot easier because you have a tribe, you have an authority, you have the ability to say, we as an entity will govern over this process. The Maori are establishing their own biobanks, the Aboriginal Australians are establishing their own biorepositories, and it's just a conversation that we in the Hawaiian community start to need to have to say, should we be in control of the research process? You know, should we encourage the Hawaiian community, the Hawaiian physicians, the Hawaiian researchers to start to say that the process needs to be in the hands of the Hawaiian community, and we need to guide that and how that looks. So that's kind of my sort of 101 on sort of everything that, you know, sort of the basic questions. I'm going to turn it back over to Lealoha. She has how this sort of pertains to the MANA platform, and then maybe open it up for just more discussion. So I guess first, what was
First, what was the name of the organization, the International Organization, Indigenous organization that I guess you said was the only one that works in this, like, regarding this issue? What was the name of that?
It's the Indigenous Genomic Alliance.
And related to Uncle's question about, because you said that indigenous populations have, there's something about our DNA that is, I guess, of interest to researchers, and I was understanding that it wasn't really clear what it is about our DNA that I guess they assume makes us more susceptible to diseases or has us react differently to different diseases. But I'm wondering if you're aware of any research that's been done that kind of examines, well, the places that we live and the kinds of pollution. I mean, for example, you know, when you're talking about Navajo Nation, you know, the radiation that's in the water. There's just so much pollution and so many other factors that would contribute to how we react to diseases and how diseases spread throughout our community. So is that something that they're really paying attention to when they say that we're so special? And you know, it's almost like that the old narrative about how, you know, when it came to I guess in the mid 1800s where you know they had those anthropologists go out and basically claim that we're not even like fully human. We're this separate breed of people, and we're not actually, you know, just regular human beings. So I'm wondering if they address that.
The reason why Native Hawaiian genetic material is of interest to researchers is because the way it's called, the difference is there's a very sort of detailed genetic discussion that goes around this, and it has to do with the idea of homogeneity of our DNA. The more alike we are, then we are different from people. We are more of an isolated population compared to the rest of the world, timeline-wise. We have a very, we live on the most isolated piece of land on the planet. And in addition to that, indigenous people have DNA that is very fascinating to researchers because they want to know where we've come from. They want to know where our last place was and how to document our origin path. They're fascinated by this. It's anthropologists have made their entire study on the fascination of indigenous people and our. So it's more of a curiosity thing that I think that people are very interested. But because our population is more affected by some health disparities, they are starting to look at our DNA like, could the answers to health disparities be in our DNA? And so, it could be in our food. Well, let me get to that part. So, the issue of epigenetics is a whole new field of science. Genetics, I can tell you honestly, if you didn't read the morning's journal on genetics, the recent publications, you're really behind when it comes to genetics. Genetics is so rapidly progressing as a field. You have to run to keep up with the advance of science. Right now, as we speak, the new field of epigenetics is developing. And epigenetics is a field of science that says, maybe it's not nurture versus nature. Maybe it's nurture, nature in between, and the genetic interaction between our environment, our food, what our mothers ate when they were pregnant with us. You know, that we are now starting to understand that our bodies and our DNA are immediately affected not just by what we were born with, but our every single daily interaction with the environment around us. And there is a possible return to a healthy lifestyle if you remove some of the poisonous factors that are affecting our health. We haven't quite figured that out yet. Science is constantly evolving. We do now have a Native Hawaiian epigeneticist who will be starting, I believe, in the fall. The University of Hawaii created a cluster hire, and there's 3 of us that are coming on board. Myself, who handles the ethics, an epigeneticist will be looking at the genetic interaction between our environment and our DNA, and then a food specialist who's actually a First Nations Mohawk woman who'll be looking at some of the interaction between eating food and how it affects our health and food sovereignty in November. So it's a new degree. It'll be a master's in Indigenous health, and it'll deal with both the biological, the science, and the data aspects of our DNA, but it'll also deal with issues around the ethics and the political control over our bodies, our rights, our health, our wellness. And so it's going to be an international Indigenous health program, and so it'll look at New Zealand, Australia, Canada, US, Hawaii, as different models of looking at Indigenous communities. So Leila has been a student of mine, and we're hoping that more people will join the program and look at it as an option for a master's in public health. But, you know, I mean, I do have to tell you, though, you know, there is so much more coming that we don't know yet about how the science is going to evolve. But we are now more and more aware that what you eat, what you're subjected to by the land, the pollution, we are now starting to go, that may have a bigger effect on our health than what we thought. You know, I'm involved in a study right now where we believe, and this is just a belief, a hypothesis. We haven't quite understood it yet. We believe that the mercury that's now in the fish that we're eating may have an interaction with the digestion of sugars in the body, and therefore the reason why we may be seeing higher rates of diabetes in populations such as ours may be more of an epigenetic relationship between foods that we're eating and what's in our diet. High fructose corn syrup, mercury, interactions, and then how our body is actually transforming because of these new changes to our DNA, you know. But we also know that if you remove some of those things, like what if you were to do a simple interaction, like remove fruit punch, high fructose corn syrup, and from the diet, could we return to a healthy lifestyle? And we're starting to see that, yeah, it's possible. We may be able to fight some of the worst disease that we're facing by just removing the crap that's in our food. So these are the things that we're starting to go, maybe just eating whatever you want may not be, that may be the problem. You know, and when you go to a luau, you know, everybody's got fruit punch and a plate of poke. So, you know, you got like your 2 worst killers right there. And then everybody washes it down with a plate of kalua pig. So, you know, and we all wonder why we have such rampant diabetes in our community. It could be an interaction between our genetics and our food, and the fact that our bodies are very sensitive to what we put in it, because we developed for hundreds of years with soy, which wiped us clean by having the most perfect food in our bodies at all times. So, you know, that itself, also the removal of traditional food, may have a huge impact on our health and wellness. You know, I'm a firm believer and I haven't proved it yet, but I believe that we are genetically required to have poi every single day. You know, like I haven't proven that yet, but it's the reason why, you know, that's the reason why I went to school in the first place. Where's Papa anyway? So Kekuni sat me down, you know, 15 years ago and said, you got to figure this out, because we really need to be able to support the fact that poi is a requirement, and it's not necessarily just a land rights or a justice issue, but it is a genetic requirement for us to have poi. I am totally off subject now, but that's fine. Any other questions? Yeah. There's no DNA test for blood to measure how much Hawaiian you might have. people always are asked, people ask me if there's a test for Hawaiian, right? Or especially when I worked in the tribes, because tribes have tribes have the ability to do dividends through casino royalties. And so you get folks who'll say, I believe I'm 1/8 Cherokee and I'd like to take the blood test to see if there's any checks available for me as a tribal member. And I used to take that phone call all the time, and I'd say, one, do you have any idea how poor and how third world country most tribal communities are? And if there was that much money running around, do you think that, you know, do you think that we're stockpiling checks that everyone's owed because of their DNA? And that's a complete myth. But this idea that people wanted a test to determine, am I Indian? Am I Hawaiian? There is no such test. And if you were more Hawaiian, would you have more of that blood? It doesn't work that way. You know, we're all human beings, and we as Hawaiians may have more patterns in it that we could look for a pattern and say, oh, this combination of letters is more prevalent, appears more often among Native Hawaiians. But it wouldn't matter if you were full-blood Native Hawaiian or half Hawaiian or 1/8 Hawaiian. That combination of letters would be there if that's a magical combination that might appear. But it may not appear in everybody who is Native Hawaiian either. So there's no black and white to DNA testing. And that's what I kind of try to encourage people to, we can't look to science for answers around our cultural belief systems, because there are Hawaiians who believed in nationalism had nothing to do with blood quantum at all. So, but yeah, the issues around blood quantum will come up often, and we will have no DNA test to determine how much Hawaiian you are. That's a really hard thing, because I'm a firm believer in perceptions of health and wellness have a lot more to do with how your worldview is. And if you are a Hawaiian who believes you're a Hawaiian, who practices as a Hawaiian and registers and is subjected to what it means to be a Hawaiian by self-identification, I don't check birth certificates to determine whether or not people can give me feedback on the concerns of the Native Hawaiian community. The efficacy are right, but you know, I'm talking to, I'm not doing a DNA test, and I'm not doing anything when it comes to biological samples. What am I doing? I'm gathering, am I a clinician? I'm a professor at the University of Medical, I teach medical ethics. So what I'm doing is I'm gathering information from the Hawaiian community on their perceptions around biobanking and putting together a document that lists out some of the concerns the Native Hawaiian community has expressed in regards to the issues around biobanking. Members of the Hawaiian community who are participating in the study, John Osorio, other members, people who have participated.
Right. Yeah, I understand where you're coming from. I really appreciate that point of view to make sure like the communities that are being represented go past the agency that you're talking about. And so, you know, a point of having this smaller discussion is to exactly hear these sorts of voices. You know, these are huge concerns for our community, right? When research is happening like this, you know, it kind of grabs us in the gut and we're like, what is this? You know, our tissue, our samples going into a repository for people, you know, to use it in a certain way for their own benefit, for their own, their names to be put on some journal articles. And so, you know, we do want to come here with sort of like an open-ended discussion to hear where Miley comes from on the side of research, because she is a researcher and she does work for the Hawaiian community, and to kind of get it out further past the focus group that she's able to conduct, because this isn't common knowledge for all of us, you know. So she is continuing the focus groups, and so to go past, you know, people who are more privy to hearing information like this is, you know, reasons why it's good to talk about it in communities like this, for us to take it to our, you know, our friends and to home to our kids and our families, to have bigger discussions, to have this information go so far as to that as a community, as a larger community, then we are having our input come into this process. So it's still in the very beginning phases of, you know, this sort of research that she's doing, and the way that she's slowly reaching out into the communities to hear back from all these different local points that we are, and so, I understand, and it's my own personal fear too. When me and Miley will tell you, like when we first started talking about this, it comes from a very fearful place. You don't want to be researched. You don't want to be tapped into. It's like, what if I look to the past, and that's where we look for information? That doesn't make me comfortable moving forward towards these really scientific processes that don't sit well in my gut. But because they are occurring, and because we do have Native Hawaiian doctors like Miley who are working for our communities, then it gives us information and sort of small alliances with these people who will work for our community. So knowing that these processes are happening, then we need to be the ones making the calls and calling the shots, so that it is for us and it is for our communities, for the generations that will could benefit from it. And there, in the end, it's like research. Yeah, there is always that fear, like maybe we won't ever benefit from it if we are the guinea pigs. If all these things that are coming into the factors of colonization, it's like, yeah, it is our food resources. It is the pollution dumped into the water 30 years ago from all the the testing. So there are so many factors that come into play, and they all need to be addressed. And so this is why these discussions are really important, to hear all the different sides. Candice.
Issues like that. And so my question to you is, are there indigenous peoples or tribes that currently have that kind of control over the research being done? Like, what are examples or models that are out there that could be helpful in thinking about how things work here?
I know of one indigenous biorepository that is being started, and it's in Australia. The Aboriginal population has started with their own research funding, with their own institution, to gather and ask their population if they want to participate in a biorepository so that they can guide the research process. There are groups, and the one that I put on here is the Genetic Alliance Registering Biobank. This isn't an indigenous population, but this is a population of people who have rare genetic diseases, who are gathering communities of people who have rare genetic diseases, and they're creating a biorepository so that they, as mothers and fathers of children who have genetic disorders, can say, we only want the DNA of our children to be involved in studies that are actually going to benefit our communities. So they basically look at it like, okay, we have the little red truck that all the scientists in the sandbox want to play with. We're going to pick the one that's most successful because we want them to put the energy into understanding our children's health disorders. So there are models for self-governance, but they aren't necessarily an indigenous process. There are a lot of communities that are starting to say, look, we don't want to leave it up to a research institution or a university to own our DNA, but for the Native Hawaiian community, because we don't have a governing entity, I don't know what that would look like. But that's, I'm sort of doing the sort of, well, we need to at least recognize, we should start these conversations and kind of I'm kind of putting it out there as a heads up, it's coming, whether we like it or not. We're right now not involved in the process. Yeah.
Talked about it earlier, but I didn't hear it. Some of the benefits, maybe some of the dangers of biobanking. What are the benefits? What are the dangers?
So one of the, I can give you an example. Right now, Native Hawaiians have the highest rate of cardiovascular disease of people on the planet, right? We are aware that we are facing devastating cardiovascular rates. Right now, there is a medication that's being developed at the Food and Drug Administration that they know will affect us in a different way than other populations. But they don't know what the dosage to give us is right now. And they don't know who to approach. So they've asked me to say, is there a cardiologist in the Native Hawaiian community that could work with our population, our researchers, to figure out what is the correct dosage. Right now I also do a study that looks at kidney transplant. And there's a specific drug that's given to people who have a kidney transplant performed. For American Indians, they need half the dosage than a regular, white American needs for that kidney to not be rejected. If you give an Indian the full dosage, you have the chance of killing that person. And so we know that there is a genetic test to identify how that person will react to that drug. These are the kind of advances that we need to know about, that there are treatments that are out there that are pharmacogenetics, they call it, that if we were involved in the studies, then we could benefit from the findings of those studies, specifically when those studies are directly tapped in and tied to our DNA and how we will react to drugs. So there is a benefit. The risks of it is somebody could go into that biobank and they could do studies that they think are very important and may be very important. You know, schizophrenia is a serious disorder, but we may not want to have the Hawaiian schizophrenia gene out there. You know, we may not want people to look at incest patterns. You know, we know that our people practiced, you know, and we don't know if that's what we want to have done. The Maori, a very dangerous thing happened in Aotearoa a number of years back, where there was a researcher who was looking at tobacco digestion, the ability for the body to digest tobacco. And at a research conference, the person who was doing the research made a comment about how there could be a relationship between the way that the body breaks down tobacco and violence. And then the media picked it up and they said, Maori are violent because of tobacco. And it was just like, whoa, that had nothing to do with anything that the research. So it isn't even necessarily the research, but how the media can twist what is science and turn it into something that creates hype and publicity, and then starts to everyone to turn back and go, well, that explains that, you know, and that's not what we want people to say, that our DNA makes us X, Y, or Z, because there are no guarantees at all, and our bodies and our environment and how we interact with our environment are more of a determining factor than our DNA. But there may be something in our DNA, and if we are really trying to understand why is our community so much more affected, is it just the rampant poverty and the low education and the poisons that are in our systems, you know, or the spam and the fruit punch? What is it that's killing us? Or is it an interaction between all of those things and the fact that our bodies were never intended to eat that kind of crap, you know? So if our bodies were meant to digest poi, then when you throw down a gallon of rice every day, is there some sort of chemical reaction that's going in there that's actually changing our DNA? You know, I don't know. But if we're not in control of that question, we're not going to have the answer to it. Because somebody who could be controlling the DNA biorepository could be fascinated on something that has nothing to do with what our communities most concerned are affected by.
So you want the Hawaiian presence in this field? It's happening anyways,
it is happening already, and we're not in control. I'm not 100% who is, but the fact that there is a very large biorepository of Hawaiian cord blood, you know, I'd love to know what they're up to. You know, I would think that we should, as a community, we should be up in arms about these things. You know, it's our baby's blood, and yeah, maybe they're doing really good stuff, but I think that they should let us know, and I think that we should be in the process of saying what research is going on, and how is it helping our community. And we need to understand as a Hawaiian population that this is something we can leverage. If we had a biorepository, if we had our own bank, then we could pick and choose what research studies were going to benefit our community. Right now, it is not up to us to make any of those decisions.
Address our sacred beliefs about body and that. How do you address that? I understand. It sounds positive, but how do you tell somebody who believes in the sacredness of these things you're talking about, your body parts, it's our culture? You know?
We have 3 more minutes, so I kind of wanted, maybe you could talk with Miley after about that, unless someone who had a question, I saw hands up maybe a little while ago. He went. Did you have a question? No? Okay, so we'll go ahead. You want to answer that one, and then that'll be it. So thank you for listening. Yeah.
Can I respond to this question really quick? And then, so the issues on sacredness, you know, how I started down this process was because I was given a charge around the sperm bank. And if you want to talk about sacredness of our bodies, yeah, our blood, our hair, and our fingernails have mana, but I have been instructed and guided because I've been told that we need to figure out how to deal with the fact that we are dying off as a race. And I was told to learn everything that I possibly could, because the way that you store biorepository tissue is the same process that you could use to store sperm and ovum. And we also need to be aware that if we have so many donors of sperm and ovum, that we need to look at some of the things that are happening genetically in our population, because if our community is the most affected by these diseases, we don't want to reproduce that. So I've been given a very strong cultural charge to do that, and it's a very slow process because there are a lot of issues and ethics involved in it, and none of that is anything that has to do with the scientific process, but has to do with the process that has been put forth to me to say, hey, girl, go figure this out, and maybe you're going to be the first one who's going to carry the seed. Like, okay, auntie, whatever you like. But, you know, I mean, we're here to serve, so whatever you like. You like, sign up, come. We're taking donors. No, not just kidding, not yet.
So, yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for listening to the Biobanking and Body Pulling. Thank you again, Maile.
And if anybody wants to have more information, my email address and my contact is on the bottom of this information sheet. There's a couple just sort of places to look on the website, on the internet, if you want to learn about biorepositories. These aren't sites that I necessarily think are authorities, but one is the National Cancer Institute and one is the Indigenous Genomic Alliance. It just might give you a place to start. And there are handouts. The remainder of the handouts will be on the table if folks. And also feel free to email me and contact me. I'd love to gather your concerns and thoughts and share it with folks who are wanting to come after us. Thank you. Aloha.